Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this workshop. My name is Martin Poch from ACER, and today in this workshop, we, ACER and TSOs, NCE, and core arrays will try to present the current status quo regarding the long-term flow-based capacity calculation and allocation. To give you some ideas and feelings, where do we stand and what is coming up in the next few months and years before we can expect the implementation of the flow-based in long-term time frame. Zoran, if you can switch to the agenda. So first, in the first part of the workshop, we will summarize the development of two capacity calculation methodologies in core and in Nordic. And we will present first from ACER side the adoption of the core methodology and of the Nordic methodology. Then we will give some room for feedback to market participants. In the second part, we will give the floor to TSOs to present their status of implementation, and to core arrays, also how they intend to approach the regulatory oversight. So the second part will be about the implementation process and planning. And the last part will be about flow-based capacity allocation. And in this case, we also want to give the floor to NCE, how they plan to approach this this part of the task. Having said this, some housekeeping rules for today. Your cameras and mics are muted, and there will be a Q&A session. I think after every section, if I'm not mistaken. And during this session, just raise your hand, and our administrator will unmute you, and you will be able to speak. That's important. And one final note: the webinar and the workshop is being recorded and will be published on ACER website, so that you are aware that if you speak, you will be in the recording. Having said this, I think I can give the floor to the first presentation from Zoran about the adoption of the long-term capacity calculation methodology in core region.
Yes, Martin, thank you. So, sorry if I will repeat some slides which are already known to market participants and various stakeholders on the core long-term capacity calculation methodology, but I guess that we have many new participants which were, let's say, fresh in this process, so we have to repeat some of the details from the methodology which has been adopted, as well as part of the history to understand what's in behind of our decisions. So, in brief, in this slide, I can say that core long-term capacity calculation methodology, which was adopted in November last year, shall apply for yearly and monthly time frame with the flow-based approach. And later on, we will briefly present our proof about the economic efficiency of the flow-based approach, which was necessary according to the FCA requirement. This methodology will apply multiple scenarios or common grid models for calculation of flow-based parameters. More about this on the next slide. And it will, which is different from the first attempt, it will provide flow-based parameters for explicit flow-based auctions with options without transferring this to some intermediate NTC values. The implementation timeline is 3 years. That means that we are about to start with yearly auctions for 2025 and monthly auctions for January 25. We wanted to make this methodology as simple as possible, as straightforward as possible. And however, with gathering experience in the first 18 months, we expect, and we plan subsequent revision of the methodology after that period. So the previous iterations were: first, TSOs developed the core LTCC methodology in 2019, which is based on flow-based capacity calculation with conversion to NTCs, coordinated NTCs, from the flow-based parameters. However, after lengthy discussions, this approach failed, as it was not possible without the arbitration, without some rules of the thumb, to make an agreement how to split these interdependent cross-zonal capacities among core borders. Everything went back to flow-based principles, so that's why the idea was to continue with the flow-based methodologies. In flow-based approach, such split is not necessary because this flow-based allocation determines the volume of capacities directly through the parameters and coordinated for the whole region based on the maximization of economic surplus. The second iteration was in 2020, and again, this was a flow-based approach with both capacity calculation and allocation in flow-based manner. This was core TSO's proposal, and this was a significant step forward from the first iteration. However, it was not accepted by core NRAs. They required certain methodological adjustments and shorter deadline. At that moment, the deadline was meant to be 5 years, which we also considered too long. Then such methodology has been referred to ACER, and in the third iteration from last year, we repeated the approach that is flow-based for both capacity calculation and allocation. And with joint efforts of core stakeholders and ACER, this methodology has been developed, and you can find it on our website as well. So all three iterations were supported with the public consultations, and I believe that market participants were properly informed and have a possibility to express their positions and concerns. So just briefly about the timeline, I will not repeat all the steps from the last year, just we in our referral of core long-term methodology, we followed all the procedure and timing pursuant to the FCA requirements, and we had a public consultation in a public workshop during July last year. Also, we, because of many concerns and the discussions, we continued informing and including market participants through regular mask meetings and one dedicated meeting during autumn. And of course, we would like to invite market participants for further coordination and active involvement in the implementation of this methodology. Now, briefly about methodological aspects and inputs and outputs. So the critical network elements and contingencies for the long-term level shall be consistent with those at the initial list of connects on the day-ahead level. And so there will be no separate selection of long-term connects. And of course, during the calculation process for each timestamp, this list will be filtered to the final connect list based on the 5% Ptdf threshold. Immediately to explain about the capacity calculation output, you can see some illustration of how this would look like. The concept is that final flow-based parameters will be Ptdf and RAM values after validation, where a union of all connects from all scenarios, that mean all models, whether January, peak, off-peak, February, December, etc., will be a joint set of constraints for the long-term flow-based auction. Such a huge set of data will be pre-solved, and the redundant constraints will be removed from it. Also other capacity calculation inputs. So regarding the common grids models and scenarios, our first attempt was to use common grid model methodology from AFCA, but together with core TSOs, we realized that there is insufficient number of network models over there, and the resolution of outage planning is not appropriate. Then that's why we enabled the temporary core modeling procedure, which would increase number of models to 24 models per yearly auctions and 2 models per week for monthly auction, which ends up with 8 to 10 models for monthly auction. This is quite a huge set of data compared to what's in CGMM and what's used now. And such methodology will be able to run until the next CGMM amendment, because we expect and we have to push that such advanced approach is to be applied across Europe. That means on pan-European level in the CGMM amendment whenever it comes. For the operational security limits, or Fmax, on critical network elements, it will be calculated on the basis of AC load flow data by default, and the flow reliability margin will be taken from the day-ahead level. Other aspects, allocation or external constraints, are announced to be used by the Netherlands and Poland to our mind, not directly needed for long term as itself, but to ensure compatibility with the day-ahead level as they are used over there. So we allowed using of external constraints on top of the flow-based parameters, but we see this as a solution that needs careful monitoring and provision of both methodologies and data for calculating these external constraints. Remedial actions and their optimization shall not be used on the long-term level because it's too far away from the real time, and there is a high uncertainty of remedial actions forecasting. So this will be plain flow-based parameters without the remedial actions optimization. HVDCs at core borders, that is Allegro at this point of time, shall follow the evolved flow-based principles, the same ones as on the day-ahead level. That means that 2 connecting points of HVDC will be modeled as a virtual bidding zones within the algorithm. This is a set of formula for Ptdf and RAM calculation, and also explanation of validation. I will not go into details over here, maybe just to mention that in the case of long-term methodology, for the first time in the core region, AC load flow solution will be applied for the reference flow calculation, and of course Ptdf's calculations stay linearized. For the validation, there is only individual validation applied on this level of methodologies, and core TSOs can, through this validation, whenever they see the concern, they can update the input data, and we can repeat the calculation in case of inconsistencies. And they can also correct RAM in case of there are security concerns which cannot be managed with the update of the input data, and cannot be reflected, which is of course subject to later justification. Minimum RAM was the biggest discussion during our proceedings, because the future allocation outcomes of the core flow-based strongly depend on it. During last summer, we performed limited experimentation on number of models provided by TSOs to seek what would be applicable minimum RAM throughout the region, which would, let's say, provide sufficient hedging opportunities and not endanger system security. Also, we had consultations with core NRAs and TSOs regarding this respect. We also discussed with market participants earlier. And finally, we set these values that on minimum RAM on yearly level would be 20% of Fmax, and on monthly level, additional 10% of Fmax. Unfortunately, such minimum RAM values are expected to provide some lower allocated capacities when compared to the historical ones, but these historical were and are uncoordinated. So we expect further increase of these values through the implementation. We provided the upper band of doubling these values from 20 to 40% and from 10 to 20% on monthly. But we could not and we did not want to push further TSOs to increase these values without detailed analysis with multiple scenarios and multiple models by the core TSOs, which will take place during the implementation time. And finally, a few words about the economic efficiency of flow-based. So we were triggered indeed by the situation where we cannot apply converted NTCs as a long-term solution without some arbitrary decisions of splitting these values across the borders. That was the first reason to apply flow-based. We also strongly believe in flow-based approach and compatibility of long-term solution flow-based with the day-ahead solution flow-based, and finally, at the end, intraday flow-based. Nevertheless, FCA Article 10.5a required that if flow-based is applied on the long-term level, it needs to be proven that such solution increases the economic efficiency with the same level of network security. We made an experimentation in this respect, where we used the same. We used the comparison of historical NTC values and allocation results from the 2020, and we converted actual NTCs into minimum run values in the flow-based calculation in our simulation of flow-based. That was the way how to achieve the same level of system security, because in general, the same amount of capacity has been offered to the market in both NTC way and the flow-based way in this respect. And using the same bids from the previous yearly auctions on 2020, we also had the same market input. Such results shown that which is the main parameter, economic surplus under these conditions has been increased for 27% when compared to the long-term NTC auctions. There is a similar increase of congestion revenue and some decrease of allocated quantities in megawatts. So according to the necessity to increase economic efficiency, economic surplus is a definite criteria which shows this increase. The effect of allocated quantities is different, so they are lower, but we had to bear in mind that this is expected effect of applied cross-regional optimization, because now in a cross-regional manner, the algorithm prioritizes more valuable megawatts. That means ones that provide more let's say higher bid to be allocated. That's how it has been done. So and finally, my last slide is just a summary. I will not read this. Just I will leave this as a sort of let's say collection of 4 main details from the core long-term CCM. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoran. With this, I would now invite Martin Wiehauser to present the decision on the Nordic flow-based, long-term flow-based methodology. Martin, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Martin. So yeah, I will give you a short presentation on the Nordic flow-based capacity calculation methodology and process. I will not go into the same details and as done by Zoran right now. This is the right slide. Oh, okay, sorry. I will have to. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Yes, so as said, I mean, the Nordic long-term capacity calculation methodology was proposed as one of the first long-term methodologies, and it was proposed in January 2019 and later referred by the Nordic NRAs to ACER for a decision. The major point of disagreement was mainly on the choice whether to call it a flow-based or a CNTC methodology. And we had an ACER decision on this in October 2019, and also define it then as a flow-based capacity calculation methodology, as also what was proposed by the TSOs was mainly mirroring the flow-based approach, and also following all these subsequent steps, and not the steps of an ACER approach and compliant with what is in the FCA regulation as an ACER approach, but just at the end it had this Atc extraction. And in our decision, we also decided on an implementation timeline for the Nordic long-term CCM, which should be implemented by 12 months after the day ahead and intraday CCM in the Nordic is implemented. So currently foreseen for March 2023 plus this 12 months. And the flow-based long-term capacity calculation will provide flow-based parameters as said for the allocation of cross-zonal capacity, but there is also a transitional solution described as an Atc extraction until flow-based allocation is available. Maybe also to give you now an overview on the status of LTTRs in the Nordics. It's rather limited compared to core, where we only have one bidding zone border, which is currently issuing LTTRs, which is the DK1, DK2 bidding zone border, which is a HVDC bidding zone border. Also something to shortly mention that there is ongoing discussions for the Finnish-Swedish bidding zone border, that there is in case of insufficient hedging opportunities in the Finnish bidding zone, and a decision according to FCA article 30. Paragraph 5 will be taken. But this is still open, and there is also likely outcome that this will not go for LTTRs, but for alternative solution, which is embedded in their current EPET system. So this is just something to mention. But as it currently stands, there is just a DK1, DK2 HVDC bidding zone border, and it will start with NTC and then later switch to flow-based, which shouldn't make a huge difference in this case, at least. Yes, and for the remaining bidding zone borders, of course, we will still have the complete capacity calculation in the Nordic region, but the outcome of this will mainly serve as a source of information for the long-term markets. Yes, so and that was already the short presentation I had. In case of any questions, of course, I'm open. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Now I give the floor to Hélène for short oral feedback on behalf of IFET and Euroelectric.
Yes, hello, good morning. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. First, maybe a short word of introduction. So we thank very much for the organization of the workshop, because we think this is really a key topic, the necessity of having a forward transmission rights in the forward time frame is really key for the market integration. And sometimes you have the perception it is a bit forgotten, or a lot of emphasis and energy is put on the development of short-term markets, which is of course very important, but which is not the only important aspect of the market. I will be very short on the capacity calculation. So on the process, we just wanted to share with you a few points. So indeed, there has been several discussions and consultations in which we always raise the concern on the utilization of flow-based. And what we regret a bit is that it went very fast at the end of the process, and the simulations and the real explanation, very concrete, with the impacts on the allocation of capacities were only shown at the end, and there it went very fast. On the study that ACER made to show the added value, we would still be very keen to see a publication of this study. According to us, it's not published yet. because the consequence of a flow-based calculations and allocation are very important. So we take note of the decision regarding the calculation, despite that we are still not convinced about the real added value, but we take note of it. Now that it is there, I think we want to focus on the next steps, on the implementation, and most importantly on the allocation aspects. So for the calculation, for us, transparency will be very key. We remember that we went through a very long process for the day-ahead capacity calculation in flow-based to agree with DSO on the transparency level. It was a long process, so we hope that we can build from the experience there to avoid that we have to, ex post or afterwards come back to the transparency principle and start with a good basis from scratch. Of course, the min-RAM value will be key. So for us, it's important to have visibility on it, to make sure how much it's going to be, and to know if and where there will be derogations, if any. So to be able to anticipate, to understand what happens. On the decision on the calculation, a very important point is that we understand and we take note that there is no description of any Atc extraction out of the flow-based domain, which then implies de facto that a flow-based allocation has to be put in place. So that's our understanding, and maybe if you can confirm that this is correct. And so if this is correct, I can tell you that our main concerns are really now on the flow-based allocation. And this is why we are quite short at the moment, and we suggested to devote more time for the discussion and for our intervention on the flow-based allocation. So for which, as I said, we have the most concern. So that's it on my side.
Thank you, Helena. Yes, indeed, in the last part, we will devote more time for this discussion. Maybe a short response regarding the study on the comparison of flow-based and NTC with regard to Article 10.5 of FCA regulation. I think that there is no specific report on that from ACER side. I think in the decision we present the methodology behind this study. So what's the methodological approach? We present the input data that was used for this analysis and the results of this analysis. So what we are saying is that there is an analysis, but the methodology, the data, and the outcome is in the decision itself. There is no dedicated report. At least we don't have it internally.
Okay.
If you would insist on making such a dedicated report, we would have to start writing it and just summarize again what has been already summarized in the decision. So we don't see.
Yeah, I can be then maybe a bit more specific, because there is one element, and that is the biggest concern we have, but I will explain you that in the second part. It's on the allocated capacities. You presented a chart where we see the volume depending on the min-RAM quantity, but we do not see a breakdown. So we just see the total allocated capacity. And since we have huge important concern on the fact that allocated capacities are lower, and you remember we discussed this is probably due because a lot of more capacities are allocated where the spread is higher, and probably less capacities where the spread is low. We would be keen to see on your study how these lower allocated capacities are spread across the different borders. Maybe not a fully detailed, but maybe a few examples, or at least showing how this affects the various borders.
Yes, I think we could do that. The only thing I would warn about, let's not make quick conclusions out of this single example. A single example was made to demonstrate or to fulfill the requirement of Article 10.5, but making any strong conclusions from this one case would be something we are afraid of that participants would make. So in this regard, we would be much more keen that we wait for the actual implementation process, during which TSOs will develop many cases, many examples, and only those will show the real impact on this quite detailed information on how specific borders compared to NTC and flow-based, how are they allocated capacities. So we could send you this data on, but please don't make quick conclusions out of this. Just as
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Martin, there are some questions in the chat.
Maybe I can go through them and you can respond. So first one, how capacities offered for the long term. So how the minimum 70% requirement is taken into account in the long-term capacity calculation.
Where in the long-term capacity calculation, there is no such a requirement. On the other hand, long-term capacities allocated needs to be considered in the day-ahead analysis of 70% requirement. So this is not part of a long-term methodology. Their inclusion in day-ahead level is also, it's for some other workshop probably. It's also it can be quite tricky depending on the LTA inclusion method, whether LTA margin or new LE approach. But we will have, I guess, sufficient time to discuss this on day ahead level.
Yeah. So just to add legally, why there is no such obligation is because Article 16.8 of electricity regulation refers to CACM regulation only. In this respect, the NURAs and TSOs interpret this that the 70% explicitly refers to the CACM-based capacity calculation methodology. That's the interpretation on our side. The second question, is there any analysis of distributional effects of less allocated capacities? That's exactly what I was trying to explain. There is one example which shows that some borders get more, some borders get less, but in some there is less. But again, please don't take this example as representative, because in some other cases the distribution could be across different borders could be different. One thing that is almost for sure that allocated capacities will most likely be consistently lower than in the NTC. But the welfare of those capacities which are allocated will be consistently higher. That's the conclusion we can make today, but the distributional effects will depend on specific market situation and specific time frame. So the next question, how was the choice made for the 20% and 10% for the min-RAM allocation? Is it based on derogations or national action plans? Zoran, if you can take this one.
Yes. So as Martin said, 70% derogation and national action plans in CEP regulation are related to CACM regulations, so are not related to long term. So the values for the minimum RAM were taken as initial value of 20% as proposed by TSOs is taken from the CWE region as a starting point. That was minimum RAM over there. In the day ahead methodology. Then we analyzed and see, first of all, that having one value, for example, on yearly level, and then rely on splitting methodology for the capacities between yearly and monthly does not ensure in each and every case the hedging opportunity on both levels. That means there can be cases where you have yearly capacities and 0 monthly capacities. That's why we set up also the additional monthly value, and this value is another 10% of Fmax, which together 20 and 10 provided more or less similar economic surplus as yearly auctions in 2020. Having in mind that these were yearly auctions compared with yearly and monthly on a flow-based level. That was then the level of min RAM that we could accept in the discussions with the TSOs, having their concerns in mind and the limited nature of our experimentation. and further push from 20 plus 10 can be done only after this additional and extensive analysis by the TSOs, which require time. That's why we also have to apologize for a late provision, as Helen said, of these values, because they were calculated during July and August. You know that we have limited time for issuing the decision. There was time needed for calculate all this and collect the data. That's why we provided them as soon as we could.
Sorry, one last final comment. So maybe just to add on the previous one, the question assumes that there is 70% obligation in the long term, but there isn't. So as we will see later in the Nordic, there is no miniram. We have miniram in the core only because we fear that without miniram, the capacities would be close to zero, just because the uncertainties in the core are much higher in the long term. That's why we have miniram in core. On the last question, is it possible to publish indicative long-term capacities for year +2, year +3? That's something that is currently not required in FCA regulation, and it would require, well, to be put in the methodology, so separate process for TSOs to calculate, first to create common grid model 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead, and then to establish a process for 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead capacity calculation. So it's not insignificant work. It is some work for TSOs, but I think at ACER, anyways, we are aware of this need. Indeed, forward market is important. 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead, maybe even more. And we are currently starting internal discussions on the amendment of the SCA. So we expect to start the amendment of the SCA somewhere end of this year, starting the recommendation. And this topic, so year ahead, so 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead, capacity calculation and allocation will be one of the main topics for discussion. And at least from ACER side, there is a wish to have some more obligation on these timeframes as well. So if you can be a bit patient, we are tackling this issue and you will be involved, and we hope that the next FCA regulation will be more ambitious in these timeframes. We also have one question, one hand raised from, if you can unmute and post a question. Or Nina, if you can unmute the participant. Okay. I should be able to unmute.
Okay, you can hear me, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding the first presentation. There was a slide showing the comparison of the NTC-based allocation and the flow-based allocation, if that were applicable. And results show that there was a significant increase in the surplus, but decrease in the allocation amount, allocated capacity. It seemed to be a little bit contradictory. While the capacity, allocated capacity would decrease if the flow-based methodology would apply, and the total surplus would increase. Does that mean that with the even less allocation, you would get more surplus with the flow-based methodology, or there's some other explanation for that?
No, this is completely consistent because as we provided here, more valuable megawatts are allocated. Now we have a coordinated approach for the whole region. That means there is no separate allocation per borders. And one border previously in NTC world had the average of €1 per megawatt. And bids from that border did not compete with other borders which had €10 per megawatt. And then the previous economic surplus and allocated quantities were just a simple sum of the different allocations and different borders. Now we have a coordinated pan-regional allocation where, let's say, each border and each bid fights against each other on the level of their influence on flows and their price. So these 10 megawatt bids will surely overrun this these 10 euro bids will surely overrun these 1 euro bids, and that's why we have less capacities allocated but with higher economic surplus. That is a normal effect. It's not nice to see smaller allocated capacity quantities, but this is a normal result of increased efficiency of the allocation principles, which are finally coordinated.
Yeah, I see. Does that also mean that you will have more capacity free to be allocated and to be offered to the markets, and you will even get higher surplus with the now more capacity to be available?
I would say so, because on these borders, let's say we are packing capacities in a better way now. So we increase the surplus with using less allocated capacities. For the subsequent auctions, there should be more capacities on these, let's say, empty spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe the last final question, but I think it's more a comment. So having this in mind, I would close this session and go to the next session on the implementation of the core and Nordic flow-based. I would first give the floor to Bert from representing core TSOs to present the implementation process of the core flow-based capacity calculation.
Yes, thank you very much. Perhaps first a little introduction. So my name is Bert Dobelaar, and I am a member of the technical work group that is now occupied with the implementation of the long-term capacity calculation methodology in the core region. And it's in fact on behalf of all the core TSOs that I will present to you very briefly the for you most important milestones in this implementation timeline. Of course, also with focus then on the involvement of market parties. Okay, so as presented in the very beginning, we know that by beginning of November the previous year, we have obtained the final calculation methodology. And this also marked immediately for us the deadline for the operational implementation of this methodology, which you can see here indicated in blue, which is November 2024, in order to be ready, in order to allow the first flow-based yearly auctions for 2025 and the first flow-based monthly auctions for January 2025. So we have a very clear target deadline for the implementation of the methodology, at least for, I'm talking about the calculation part, okay? Between now and the implementation deadline asks a whole road to follow. So we have established a roadmap, and I believe that one of the first important milestones in that roadmap for you is our development of a prototype, which we foresee to do this year. The idea is that by the second quarter of this year, we can have access to a simple prototype, which would allow us to perform some testing, some experimentation, should allow us to detect any aspect that we are not foreseeing today from technical point of view, from technical implementation point of view. So I believe that's important for you or interesting for you to know that one of the first milestone is the development of a prototype. This being said, I believe that the next important milestones for collaboration is the start of the parallel runs. So we will have first an internal parallel run, followed by an external parallel run. The internal parallel run is foreseen by Q1 2024, which you can see on the slide a little bit to the right. I'm talking about Q1 2024 now. A couple of months internal parallel run, immediately followed by the external parallel run, which has to take minimum 6 months, so which currently we also foresee to take 6 months as we have a relative tight time frame. So I believe that these are the most important events in the whole implementation roadmap between now and November 24. Having now those milestones highlighted, I think it's very important that that throughout implementation of the methodology, we have a good involvement of you, of market parties. And we believe that the CCG platform, the core consulting group, that forms the best platform to get to get your involvement, to get our cooperation, to get in feed from your side, to line on things, to discuss, to define KPIs, reporting, transparency requirements. So I think that's the main story, the main message I want to give to you today is that the cooperation is going to be important throughout the next months, years, and at this stage we see this via the core consultation group meetings, which we would foresee on a regular basis, and somewhere we expect we should increase that frequency once we are approaching or once we are into the internal external parallel run. Okay, so yeah, that's basically the main message I want to communicate today, and I don't know if there's any question from your side.
Thank you, Bert. No, I don't see for the moment, but we will come back to at the end of the session.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the moment. Now I give the floor to Core Anyways, to Hrvoje, to present their planned approach to regulatory oversight, the long-term capacity calculation methodology in Core. Hrvoje, the floor is yours. Or it's going to be Nico, I don't know. Maybe we need to allow.
Hello.
It's Hrvoje, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Martin. Good morning to everyone. I am Hrvoje Miličić, work at the Croatia Energy Agency, and I will present you in the name of the Core and RACE our monitoring task regarding the long-term capacity calculation methodology. Okay. So basically, Article 21 of the Core long-term capacity calculation methodology prescribes data which will be provided to Core NRAs for the purpose of monitoring its compliance with this methodology and the relevant legislation. And these are at least information on the non-anonymized names of the CNECs, which will be provided on a regular basis, namely at yearly and monthly frequency. And besides that, Core NRAs may request any additional information from the Core TSOs. The main document relevant for NRAs is the annual monitoring report prepared by the Core TSOs, and of course with the help of the TSC and Coreso. And this report will contain a lot of useful information to Core NRAs, which will help the NRAs in our task of monitoring the efficiency of the long-term calculation and allocation. And these data are basically related to the assessment of the quality of the data published on dedicated online communication platform, which will supposed to be JAO, and accompanied by the detailed analysis of a failure to achieve sufficient data quality standards. Also, it will contain monitoring of the effects and performance of the application of the long-term capacity calculation methodology in a template which will be commonly agreed between NRAs and TSOs. Also, there will be monitoring of the accuracy of non-core exchanges forecast in the common grid model, which is very important since we know that core region is in the center of Europe. Also, validation monitoring report, which shall include information for each CNEC of the pre-solved domain affected by reduction, and for each day-ahead capacity calculation market time unit, that means hour. So these are information like volume of the change of the RAM value and reasons for reduction, and also indicating general measures to avoid validation reductions in the future. Also information like the pre-solved connects that were subject to mean RAM adjustment and some statistics on connects with applied mean RAM. Also, besides that, Article 20 of the core long-term capacity calculation methodology prescribes a large quantity of data which will be publicly available, and they can be of great interest to the market. These publicly available data will contain at least information about connects, information about generation shift key, detailed breakdown of the final flow-based parameters per CNEC, like Imax, voltage, Cosen's fee, Fmax, FREF, FRM, RAM, min RAM application, zone-to-zone Ptdfs. So that means a lot of useful data. Also, there will be information regarding external constraints, information about capacity validation, and forecast information contained in the common grid model. And besides all the mentioned information that will be provided to public or exclusively to NRAs, it is important that market participants are adequately involved in the process of setting up this new concept for long-term flow-based explicit allocation. And therefore, core NRAs believe that TSOs will continue to regularly and often involve market participants in their work and take into account their responses and concerns to enable to meet market participants' needs and expectations regarding long-term hedging opportunities. Okay. So regarding min RAM levels, as it is already indicated in the core long-term capacity calculation methodology, min RAM levels are defined for yearly and monthly time frame. Basically, 20% of the Fmax, so maximum admissible power flow, of each CNEC should be given to the calculation process for yearly capacities. And in addition to that, 10% of the Fmax of each CNEC should be given to monthly capacities. And although at first instance these values could look high enough, it is necessary to point out that long-term capacity calculation makes the usage of multiple scenarios, and in combination with the application of outage topologies, these characteristics could limit the cross-zonal capacities. Flow-based explicit calculation and allocation gives the new paradigm of the European wholesale market, and this new concept asks for adequate testing. Therefore, experimentation or dry run of the core long-term capacity calculation methodology done by TSOs, and of course by the coordinated capacity calculator and JAW, it is the crucial step for defining adequate min RAM levels. Therefore, the long-term capacity calculation defines possibility for increasing of the min RAM values, and in essence, if there are no identified network security constraints, min RAM level can be set with higher limits up to 40%, and monthly levels up to 20%, like it was already presented by Zoran. So setting the higher values for the min RAM parameter, which is one of the most important ingredients of the long-term capacity calculation methodology, is not an easy task. So prerequisite for this is the comprehensive analysis and consultation of the modified level with the core regulatory authorities and stakeholders. Therefore, for efficient execution of this task, adequate inclusion of the market participants and NRAs is inevitable. Okay, so the FCA regulation aims at promoting effective long-term cross-zonal trade with long-term cross-zonal hedging opportunities for market participants. Taking this into account, core NRAs expect good level of capacities to be ensured and provided to the market. As already indicated in previous slide, During experimentation of the core long-term capacity calculation methodology, core TSOs can set the higher levels than 20% for yearly and 10% for monthly calculation of the min RAM, and how it is currently written in the core long-term capacity calculation methodology issued by ACER. Increasing the level of the min RAM does not need usual regulatory approval. This means that securing the timely implementation is the crucial driver for long-term capacity calculation methodology settings. The envisaged implementation of the methodology should be in practice for calculating the yearly capacities for the year 2025. Timely implementation of the core long-term capacity calculation methodology will have great benefits for many other processes, and core NRAs will be very cooperative to ensure the implementation deadline. Go live of this new approach will bring many benefits, like the stopping of the current non-harmonized long-term calculation on core borders, remuneration of the long-term capacities, congestion income distribution, reduction of the loop flows, and adequate day-ahead domain. There is also a possibility in the FCA regulation that regulatory authorities may request amendments of terms and condition methodologies at any point in time if the acts prove to be inadequate. Also, regarding the possibility to improve the current text of the core long-term capacity calculation methodology, it should be pointed out that several amendments are already envisaged in the methodology after the go-live. So within 18 months after the go-live of the methodology, core TSOs with support of the TSC and Corezo shall review the methodology and, if relevant, submit to core NRAs a proposal for amendment for many characteristics like FRM, allocation constraints, generation shift key, min RAM levels, and other elements of the methodology. Thank you.
Thank you, Hervé. Sorry, thank you, Hervé, for this extensive presentation. It's good to know that NRAs are also on top of this process and following closely. With this, I would close the topic for the core methodology and give the floor to Trond to present the timeline for the Nordic flow-based methodology.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. With a clear present danger of doing a lot of repetition of what Martin told us earlier, our plan is to implement a target model for the long-term capacity calculation, which is a flow-based approach. And our flow-based approach is much like the approach in core, but with some significant differences. First and foremost, we will apply what previously at least was known as advanced hybrid coupling also on external borders. And second, we have also implemented a version of dynamic constraints in our flow-based approach. And eventually, we do not have this min RAM adaptation. And also, as was mentioned, there are no transmission rights traded in the Nordics except for one border between DK1 and DK2. So the long-term capacity calculation is mainly for forecasting purposes only for the market participants, but also for the TSOs. And as was mentioned earlier, we have an intermediate solution, which is an Atc extraction solution. The process is as following. We develop a long-term CGMs based on scenarios. And from those long-term CGMs, we calculate flow-based domains. And from those flow-based domains, we can extract long-term Atc domains. And both those domains will be published. Both a flow-based domain and long-term Atc domains will be published to the stakeholders. We do have a lot of meetings with the stakeholders, frequent meetings with the stakeholders, where all aspects of capacity calculation and implementation are discussed. And obviously, moving forward in time, much more focus will be on the long-term capacity calculation as being developed right now. The plan currently is that we will start external parallel run with the day-ahead and intraday flow-based solution in March this year. And 12 months later, we will go live with the solution, which is March 23. 12 months after that one, the plan is to start going live with the long-term capacity calculation, thus in March 2024. The slide says March, April. That is an error. It should be March. We also have a prototype for Atc extraction that we will apply in the period where we are doing external parallel run for the day-ahead intraday market. This prototype is basically the capacity calculation that will be valid for the intraday market. But the technology is exactly the same for the Atc extraction for the intraday market and also for the long-term market. So the prototype period will probably give a good indication of how the long-term domains will look like in terms of ATCs. The implementation of the long-term capacity calculation is ongoing as we speak. We are now working on establishing the long-term CGMs. This work is expected to last until August next year. Then we will start external parallel run in August and be done with the external parallel run of the long-term capacity calculation in due time to go live in March 24. There are also some requirements for amendments to the current methodology. So this is an ongoing work. We will continue on doing the amendments and the updates to the long-term CCM after we go live in March 24. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so just to give a flavor of how we intend to implement the Atc extraction. We have a slight different take on this than what is being done in core. So what we have in mind in the Nordic is to apply an optimization algorithm, basically asking the algorithm to create the largest possible NTC or ATC domain that fits inside the flow-based domain. And of course, we will also need a base case, and the base case flows is required to be a part of the ATC domain. So the input to this process is basically the long-term flow-based domains and the base case flows. And the algorithm will find a set of ATC values that maximizes the ATC volume, respecting the flow-based constraints, and include the base case flows. In this process, we will remove all small Ptdfs, not the CNEs, but the small zone-to-zone Ptdfs. That means that the flow-based domain used to extract ATCs will be slightly larger than the virgin domain. The difference from what is done in core in terms of ATC extraction is the optimization functionality. Whenever our optimization hits a limitation, a connect that is limiting to the domain, it will not stop. It will continue to see whether it can improve the domain by moving in other directions. And we have seen previously that this gives us slightly larger ATC domains than the straightforward expansion of ATC domains inside the flow-based domain. Next slide, please. So this is just to give a flavor of how the preliminary solution looks like. On the left-hand side, there is a high-level map of the Nordic electricity market. All the blue circles are the Nordic bidding zones. And all the borders between the bidding zones are indicated in the figure. What is shown on the bar chart is a preliminary result of an ATC extraction or NTC extraction for one specific hour. The blue bars are the resulting NTC capacities, and the red dots are the maximum flow, the maximum theoretical flow on each of the borders. The small black lines are the maximum allowed flows given these NTC values. So what we can observe here is on the left-hand side of the bar chart are all the AC borders in the Nordics. That's basically the borders in Norway and Sweden. And what we see is that the NTCs do not varies a lot, and they will not be at the maximum capacity, obviously. But when we look at the right-hand side of this chart, we come to the more radial borders and also to the HVDC borders. And when we look at the HVDC borders in particular, the NTC values are mainly on the maximum flow loaded on the HVDCs. So the distribution of NTCs is a problem, or is difficult in the AC grid, not that difficult for the HVDC borders. So this is a snapshot of how we expect the NTCs to be according to the maximum flows, the maximum physical, theoretical physical flows on the borders. And also there's a small plot showing the maximum export and import for each bidding zone in the Nordics, provided these NTC values. That's basically what I intend to speak about today. So if there are any questions, you can post them now, or we can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Trond. So I think we will have a discussion at the end of this this session. Now I give the floor to Hélène again, I guess, to present the feedback from IFET and Euroelectric.
Yes, thank you. I think I will be short as well, and just say that for sure it's going to be a lot of change ahead. So we would like to make sure there will be stakeholder involvement frequently for the different regions. So in the consultative group of the relevant regions, and maybe it will be interesting to in the future have comparisons and see why and how in the Nordic region an NTC extraction is feasible and not in the core region, to make sure we really understand the differences that lead to this choice. But as I said, the big worries we have is on the flow-based allocation. So on my side, I will be quick for the moment to make sure we have sufficient time to discuss it.
Okay, thanks, Hélène. Now open the floor for discussion. I think there was quite some movement in the chat, but I think it's mainly for the previous session. I don't see any questions on this one, on the implementation issues or implementation process. But maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Are there any questions about the foreseen implementation of both core and the Nordic long-term flow-based methodologies? No. There is one discussion in the chat about, well, if I can summarize the chat about the publication of 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead information on capacities. I think that indeed both sides are correct. So we can't publish the forecasted allocated capacities 3 years ahead, but what we could publish if we stretch our resources is offered capacity. So what's the offered flow-based domain 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead? That's what is possible. Of course, we will have a debate on that, but I think there was one debate that we would need to have long-term, so 2 years ahead common grid model, 3 years ahead common grid model. But as I mentioned in the chat, we could also have statistical approach, even though one cannot predict today long-term offered capacity 3 years ahead. One can look at the past and see that there is always some capacity being available, and draw some conclusions from the past. But I don't want to prejudge these discussions that will come. And there was also some discussion on the 70%, the NTC and flow-based. This is indeed a pertinent discussion. That 70% in flow-based is quite clear. What does it mean? It means 70% capacity of thermal capacity of specific network element, specific line. But in case of NTC, that's a bit more tricky issue, and that's what we in the CACM amendment we will try to explain and clarify what 70% in case of NTC means, so that also in NTC this will be more clear. Okay, if there are no specific questions on this part, I would then maybe propose to have, because we are ahead of, yes, yeah, we are a bit ahead of schedule. If we can take 5-minute break, that would be okay. And we meet at 10:20, so 10:20. We continue with the allocation process, and we will have sufficient time for this part until 12. So see you again at 10:20. Welcome back, everyone. I think we are starting the last part of this workshop, which might be of the highest interest to stakeholders. It's on the forward capacity allocation, so the flow-based capacity allocation in the long-term time frame. In this section, we have first a short presentation from Zoran on what has been done from ACER side in this regard, and then we will switch to presentation from TSOs. So Zoran, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Just one slide here to announce the discussion on the amendment of long-term allocation methodologies. So in order to enable flow-based for the first time on the long-term level in these two regions, we requested during the last year the TSOs to amend the methodologies which are related to FCA regulation, which so far recognized only the NTC allocation for the long term. After some discussion, exchanging of opinions, and assessing the timeline, we agreed on the following deadlines, which are assuming no endangering implementation in any of the two regions according to their time schedule. That means that until 1st of October this year, the methodologies to be adopted would be SAP, that is a requirement for single allocation platform, congestion income distribution methodology, and FRC methodology for sharing costs of firmness and remuneration of LTTRs. Until 1st of March next year, the harmonized allocation rules are expected to be adopted. So this is just a list, and more details on the timeline in general will be provided by Harald now in the next presentation. I just have to switch to that part.
Thank you, Zoran. Just to complement, these deadlines are the deadlines for TSO submitting the proposals. So TSOs will submit those proposals by October this year or March next year, and then subsequently there will be approval by ACER of all those methodologies. Thank you. And now I give the floor to Harald to present the process. How do we get there in these methodologies from NCOE side?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. My name is Harald Haider. I'm working from the Austrian TSO for APG, and I'm presenting here the slides in my role as the technical lead expert for implementation of long-term flow-based allocation on NCOE level. Therefore, we can directly go to the next slide. Here again, we see these four methodologies which are just now mentioned by Zoran, and also in the first presentation of Zoran, it was explained why and how there shall be the step made from explicit allocation of long-term to a flow-based capacity calculation methodology. And of course, a logical consequence of this step to go from explicit long-term allocation to flow-based allocation is that on the one hand, the allocation algorithm and methodologic has to be updated accordingly. And on the other hand, of course, this will influence specific methodologies which are here, these four old TSO methodologies which were already mentioned. But there could be also concern some CCR regional methodologies. Here I would especially raise the focus to the splitting methodology. So first, what have we done so far? We made a first gap analysis related to these four old TSO methodologies. What has to be updated, what has to be changed, that we can implement a long-term flow-based allocation. This was the first, and how much effort this would mean. And based on this, we agreed with ACER in a first step to two basic, very important things. The first thing is that we have to update for this methodology for submission until end of Q3 2022. And the second, very probably more important thing that was that we agreed with ACER that we will implement also in the drafting process for those methodologies the market participants. So this was an essential outcome of this first discussions and gap analysis together with ACER. The second thing what we also did so far was that we prepared a high-level market design document. This document is including is building a framework, a first framework, how and what should this long-term flow-based allocation implementation should look like. So it's important that I can say here there is agreement that regular contact with market participants is foreseen to implement the long-term flow-based allocation. I say with all stakeholders they are concerned, which means TSOs, NRAs, ACER, and especially also CHAO then. Then on the next slides, next 4 slides, I will take the focus a bit to each of these 4 mentioned all TSO methodologies. The first one is a single allocation platform. As a sub-proposal. This is relevant for market participants, especially because the single allocation platform, which is in fact CHAO, is on the one hand the single point of contact for market participants, and therefore they have a very important role in the communication between market participants for the implementation and operational tasks of CHAO on the one hand, and on the other hand, what are the main what is the main content of this methodology? This is this is that the single allocation platform as the auction operator is responsible for performing the long-term auctions on the one hand, and on the other hand, the single allocation platform is also the entity for clearing and settlement of these auctions related to market participants, related to TSOs, but also related to CCPs. So these are the most important things which are described in this methodology related to market participants. Then to the next methodology. This is the congestion income distribution methodology on long-term side, FCA-CID methodology. Here, the main content of the methodology is how the congestion income, which is generated with the long-term auction, has to be distributed to TSOs. Currently, the rule for explicit allocation is quite simple, that the congestion income generated on a bidding zone border is shared by the so-called standard sharing key 50-50 to the TSOs beside the relevant border. If there is no specific agreement, for instance, for merchant line. However, it's important to say that the congestion income, which is given from CHAO to TSOs based on this sharing key, is not owned for sure by these TSOs. This congestion income has to be used for further updating of network of the networks, or for maintenance of networks, or if there is some money still available, then this could also be used for reducing the tariffs of the individual hub or country. So this is the most important thing for the congestion income distribution methodology. So in principle, is how to distribute the congestion income to the TSOs. The next one. The next methodology is the firmness and long-term remuneration part. Here, the main focus for, or the main importance for market participants is, of course, if you award long-term allocation rights, then you have, on the one hand, if this would be PTRs, in the past you could use this PTRs, or if you don't use it, they were automatically financially compensated. Now in the future, especially in core, usually we will allocate financial transmission rights. This would mean that automatically for the market participants, this financial transmission rights will be compensated. Currently with the market spread, there is for FTRs no possibility to nominate. However, of course, also if long-term rights are curtailed, this has to be compensated by the TSOs, and how this remuneration of allocated long-term rights is regulated. This is a main part of this methodology. So and also an additional part is if there is a negative congestion income, for instance, how this negative income will be shared between TSOs, because it's of course not possible to invoice here market participants. Market participants are remunerated for their allocated long-term rights. And then the next slide. These are the harmonized allocation rules. This, of course, is also a methodology which will be influenced and has to be updated by this change from explicit allocation to long-term flow-based allocations. The harmonized allocation rules, the main contents here is in the detailed organization of all auctions, which means beginning from the bidding to the collaterals which have to be brought from the market participants, further to the details of the allocation process, publication of results. These are the main topics of the harmonized allocation rules. So this is this, I would say, the basis of the operation between market participants and CHAO by performing the allocation process. Here, of course, also in the HAS is it is mentioned how market participants can register for taking part of allocations. Yes. These are the main parts which are dealing with in the individual methodologies. So I think they are linked. The slides are linked to the methodologies itself. And when we share them, I think it is shared. Then you can have also a closer look to the individual methodologies if you are interested in, but these are the main parts which are especially relevant for the market participants on those four methodologies. Then to the next slide. Next one. Yes, here there is a quite colorful picture where the long-term flow-based allocation process is explained on a very basic level. However, I think it's helpful for understanding of the principle of long-term flow-based allocation. You see on the left side here the TSO long-term capacity calculation utilities, RSC. Here, this is TSOs and capacity calculation utilities calculate together the available long-term flow-based domain. This is the part we discussed in the first half of the workshop, where we heard a lot how long-term flow-based domain shall be calculated in the future. So the output of this is the long-term flow-based domain for the respective allocation, which could be a yearly allocation or a monthly allocation. This long-term flow-based domain, on the one hand, is an input data for the single allocation platform systems, which is also in the same as it was in the past, the ECAD system running at the single allocation platform operator, which is CHOW, and performing the allocation algorithm, the gray part in the middle of this graph. The second, of course, very important input for the allocation is that from the market participant side, CHOW is receiving the long-term bits. And here it is important to mention that these bits are more or less in the same character as this was in the past, which means that the bits are still forcing to be sent per bidding zone border direction. It is important here, you see this by several, that in difference to the explicit allocation, that here there is only one single flow-based allocation process for the whole region. That means that there is not, like it was in the past, individual explicit allocations for each bidding zone border. Here, if we use this long-term flow-based allocation, there is only one dedicated allocation process, including all bidding zone borders of the relevant CCRs. And therefore, for all bids, or for all borders, you have to send your bids for this one allocation. Then the allocation algorithm is running and doing its job. And finally, we will the result will be also quite similar to the result we are used from to-date processes, which means that the result will be again allocated long-term rights per bidding zone border direction. So there is in principle no change to the current results, and in the same as it was published now, it will be again published by CHOW the results, which are the long-term allocation rights awarded by the market participants based on their bids. And CHOW will send these rights to the market participants, and the market participants for sure have then to pay for the allocated rights again to CHOW, and CHOW then is doing, based on the congestion income distribution methodology, the sharing of congestion income to the relevant TSOs. So this is the basic process for long-term flow-based allocation. It's more or less the same for yearly allocation as for monthly allocation. Important to mention is only that, of course, for the calculation of the long-term flow-based domain on the monthly level, it has to be possible for market participants to give, as it is currently also the situation, to put to make resale from the yearly process to the monthly allocation process. Then we can go to the next slide. This is in principle the same process again, as I explained very detailed above to the above slides. However, here it is shown a bit different. Here the focus on that slide is to the entities which are part of this allocation process. These are, of course, the TSOs, the capacity calculation entities, the single allocation platform, which has, of course, the center responsibility for the whole processes, and then the market participants, where, as I said in the last slide, there is on the one hand they can give they can make return from the yearly products to the monthly products. If we speak about if we speak from a monthly allocation, and they have to send their bids to the auction process, and they receive the results of the auction process. And in principle, these are the same steps as in the slide before. So we can go to the next slide. This is again, here's again highlighted what I already said in the picture with the graphical with the graphical show of the long-term flow-based allocation, that there is a single flow long-term auction for all biddings on borders on one step, allocating the long-term capacity rights for the whole given CCR in one step. The result, of course, this will result, of course, in some changes for market participants related to the explicit allocations per bidding zone border as we have today. The auction tool interface has to be updated, so the validation of bids will be different, because here now we have to validate all bids together in one step in the flow-based allocation methodology. The visualization is, of course, different, because market participants do not have the NTC per bidding zone border. Currently we have for the capacity input, we have the long-term flow-based domain. However, it is foreseen that it shall be possible for market participants at least to have an indicator how much NTC could be available for each individual bidding zone border, and this shall be published also on CHAO website in prior the dedicated long-term allocations. And of course, also the results are published as this was done in the past. And also electronic interfaces has to be updated from all concerned parties, which means from TSOs, but also from market participants. However, it is assured that this update of IT especially is quite well tested together with CHAO, and there is an interval foreseen for this testing during Q1 to Q3 2020 or in 2024. However, the preparation of methodologies and how the allocation methodology will be implemented. Therefore, we would like to introduce the market participants, and we invite them, the market participants, to submit their suggestions within the time between Q1 and Q3 2022. I mentioned also that we prepared in a first step a high-level market design document where the basic in a basic framework we explained what is foreseen, how the implementation of long-term flow-based allocation shall be done. And here you see what is the content of this high-level market design document so far. Of course, we have an introduction, what the document is dealing with. Then the scope of the document, which basically says that this is a first draft, how we have agreed on N2E level that what are the basic steps for the implementation of such a methodology, to have a starting point for further discussions also with market participants. And then we also have some first concrete design proposal in this documentation. There is especially the allocation process itself, how the product should look like, the role in the allocation process is which entity is responsible for what tasks in this flow-based approach. Then the processes and interdependencies and the flow-based approach, because all the things are going, one thing is going always into the other. That means on the one hand the implementation of the method of the processes, but in parallel we have to update the different methodologies on the regular framework. We have to consider different contracts and so on. So there is a lot of different things which has to be considered on that there is could be a successful implementation. Then long-term, yes, and there is long-term the impact on other methodologies like Haas or other algorithm. I have already also mentioned the splitting rules, which probably also could be concerned by this implementation of long-term flow-based, and rules, contracts, costs for long-term flow-based implementation are also, of course, an important point, and who will bear these costs and so on. So now, definitely to the next slide. Thank you. Here now we have the timeline. We prepared for the implementation of this long-term flow-based allocation process. You can see on the upper part the timelines which are currently valid for the long-term capacity calculation processes for the core and for the Nordic regions. Here we currently have a final go live foreseen at 2024. Then you have this part with updating the 4 all TSO methodologies, which is the congestion income distribution methodology, the FCA FRC, the HAR, and the single allocation platform proposal. There, as already mentioned, the CID, the FCA, and the single allocation platform, the update of those 3 methodologies shall be done until the end of Q3 2022. Here we have foreseen that we do this on N2E level, but of course in close cooperation on the one hand with ACER, NRAs, and also with market participants, as we do it today. Started with this workshop. Then with 1st of December for 3 of those 4 methodologies, we have to send them for approval to ACER. A bit different is it for HARs, because the HAR are a regular 2-year approval process which is written in the HAR methodology itself, and considering this, we have a bit different timeline here for the HARs, and therefore currently it is planned to update the methodology also in parallel with ACER and market participants until October. However, there will be probably in Q1 2023, a public consultation, an official public consultation, which is requested by the HAR for this methodology, then the review of the consultation and the sending for approval to ACER currently is foreseen end of Q1 2023. The next important things in the timeline is requirements drafting. This is the first step this is a step we are starting with 2022 now, together with CHAO, together with market participants. We are discussing now what are the basic requirements we need for implementation of this long-term flow-based allocation, and then the next step is to draft these requirements on a common document, that it is available for all, and that based on this drafted documents we can together with CHAO we can start the development procedure, which is foreseen for starting end of 2022, over the most time in 2023. There indeed the IT implementation is foreseen, and finally starting with end of 2023 until Q2, Q3 2024, there will be the testing phases of the whole implementation. On the one hand, for the capacity calculation input as for the allocation, but also testing then with TSOs and with market participants to assure that all the IT tools will work quite well for the go live, which is finally foreseen for the yearly auction in 2025. Then, yeah, after this timeline, we can go to the last slide. Indeed, this is more or less a summary of the timeline with specific what is specific relevant for market participants' involvement. So, as already mentioned, during Q2 and Q3 of this year, we would invite you to active participate in the updating of the single allocation platform methodology, the FCA, the CID, and the FCA FRC methodology, either in this kind of workshops, or if there is an urgent need, we can also make some kind of public consultations, as this was also done, for instance, in the past, as I remember, for splitting rules on local basis. Bit different is it again, as shown in the timeline for the HAR, where there is also implementation of market participants to the drafting process. However, there will be for sure this regular public consultation process in 2023. Then, and this is very important, especially I said the CHAO will be the single allocation platform and the single point of contact for market participants to perform the allocations together with market participants. And here we have in all the discussions so far CHAO on board, and it is very important also for CHAO that all the tooling which is implemented by CHAO is developed together with the market participants, and that the market participants have quite well functionality of these tools, and that these tools which shall be used by market participants for the allocation of flow-based long-term flow-based are quite well tested and easy to operate from market participant side. So this will be assured from Chao side. There is also already implemented a project on Chao Chao. And finally, the testing, if the implementation step is finalized more or less, also with all entities, including market participants on Q2 2024, that we hopefully could have a successful go live of the long-term flow-based allocation with 2025. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Harald, for this presentation. I think it's quite useful to have the overview what's planned from NSOE side and from Jao on the allocation side. With this, I would give the floor to Hélène for a more wider presentation as a response to the allocation flow-based.
Okay, thank you.
Just to switch to the slides. They're in a different set because they were in Ptdf,
Okay.
so that's why we have to switch.
No problem. I wait. In the meantime, I can already thank NSOE for the presentation on the next steps. I think it's super useful because now we see where we have to give you our feedback and proposals. This is not the first slide. Hope there is no problem with the slides, otherwise I can display them. Yes, okay, perfect. So as I will be talking on behalf of IFET and Eurelectric, both associations having the same view on this topic, we just wanted to spare some time and share common views. So as I said at the beginning, we take the assumption, and I think it's correct, that the allocation of the forward transmission rights, at least in the core region, will be a flow-based allocation, because we understand that on the Nordic region, there is the idea to make an Atc extraction. As I said, always good to understand the difference, where they come from, and also to share experience between regions. But that being said, we will now focus on a potential flow-based allocation then. Of course, now for the core region, but those are principles valid for any allocation in flow-based of forward transmission rights. You can go to next slide. Maybe we just wanted to start with a short recap on the use and the purpose of forward transmission rights and why we use them. So basically, forward transmission rights are options. They are a hedging instrument that we use to protect against the variation of the spread. So the spread being the price difference between two zones. And not the absolute value of the spreads, but really the variation. So the option gives, if I buy it, it will give me the right to buy a certain product at a price, at a predetermined price. And in this case, for FTR options, it gives me the right as a buyer to receive the spread, so the price difference between the two bidding zones, against the payment of a fixed price. So I pay, for instance, €3, and I will receive whatever will be the outcome of the spread in the ahead between the two countries when the spread is positive. So if I own an FTR, say from A to B, from bidding zone A to bidding zone B, it means that I am no longer concerned, or I do not have to be focusing on the variation of this spread in the future, because I know that whatever the spreads, I will be compensated for this value. Of course, here I do not consider curtailment or any force majeure elements. We just put ourselves in a situation where things are normal. So this was a short recap. So really key to keep in mind that what matters to us is the variation of the spread and not the absolute value of the spread. If you go to next slide. We make a small analogy to foreign exchange, and we took the example of euro to Japanese yen and euro to CFA franc. And you see on the chart the variation of the spread of both foreign exchange. And although the absolute value of the spread for the CFA franc is way higher, it represents 0.20% of the average income for an inhabitant of Ivory Coast, while it only represents 0.03% for a Japanese citizen. You see that the variation of the spread for the Japan to euro is way volatile and way higher than the one for the CFA franc, which was actually fixed at a fixed level. So the question is, which currency would you seek to hedge if you would be dealing with foreign exchange trading? Obviously, it's the euro to Japanese yen for which you would be willing to hedge if you are exposed to these spreads. So it was a small analogy, but sometimes good to take examples. If you go to next slide, what we wanted to show here again is how we use an FTR in practice and why an FTR is only useful if the spread varies. And we take an illustration example. It will be the same during the whole presentation. So we take a simple model with 3 bidding zones, so A, B, C. And you have a border between A and B and a border between A and C. And we imagine that today we have the yearly auction for the FTRs for 2023. We look 1 year ahead. And today, in country A, in bidding zone A, the market price is 50. In B, it is 60, and in C, it is 51. So, and we also then see 1 year at the end of 2023, we observe the day ahead realized price, and it ends up to be 52, 62, and 59 respectively. Those will be the same for the whole presentation. And there are 2 market participants. The first one, once or for whatever reason, he has a position, he buys A and he sells B. Meaning that by doing this operation, he collects 10 euros because the difference between A and B is 10 euros. And then every day in 2023, he will be closing his position because obviously you cannot stay with a spread position when going to realize. And he has also to sell A and to buy B. And by doing so, he actually loses 10 euros. That are summing up with the plus 10 initially obtained. And so bottom line, his operation is fully neutral. He didn't lose nor gain any money. And then you have the market participant 2. He does the same first operation, but between A and B. So he buys A and sell, A and C. He buys A and sells C, so he gains 1 euro. And then every day in 2023, he's closing his position, so selling A and buying C in the day ahead. So he loses 7 euros. So bottom line, he lost 6 euros. So you see that the market participant 2 is affected by the variation of the spread between A and C, while the market participant 1 is neutral. It doesn't bear any loss nor gain because the spread between A and B is very stable, although it is large. Then you can go to next slide, which is exactly the same story, except that market participants are buying FTR. I'm just waiting for the slide to come. Yes. So first operation is exactly the same. The second operation, though, is that they both buy an FTR. So number 1 buys an FTR from A to B at 10 euros, and number 2 buys an FTR from A to C at 1 euro. And what you see at the end is that the bottom line for both is the price paid by the FTR, of course, but the bottom line is 0. So what is very important here to see is that when you have an FTR, you are not affected by the variation of the spread, because the FTR will pay you the outcome of the day-ahead spread. And so compared to the previous situation, the difference here is that the market participant 2 has now a neutral total revenue and loss on his portfolio, similarly as the market participant 1. But the difference is that the market participant 1 had the same result without an FTR. So for him, the FTR was not really useful. Of course, nobody has a crystal ball and you cannot predict, but the message here is that an FTR is only useful for the market if the spread varies. And I know you cannot predict if the spread varies, but let's agree on the fact that it brings added value when the spread is varying. So if you go to next slide. We now wanted to tell you how you can measure or quantify the market appetite and the market interest for an FTR. And again, we take the same fictive situation with the 3 bidding zones. And if you remember, we said that between A and B, the correlation is very good. So because the market fundamental in market A follows the one in market B. Can be the case because for instance, their production mix is very similar, or the consumption behavior are very similar. So basically, the market behaves the same way in A and B. When prices goes up in A, prices goes up in B, and vice versa. So you can assume that the market participants will have a low interest in hedging the spread between A and B, because they have good reasons to believe that the spread will stay very stable. So they don't see the need to protect against price variation. And so the value of the spread is 10 at the moment of the auction, 60 minus 50. But you can assume that market participants will bid a little bit higher than the forward value of the spread. So let's assume they bid around 10.5. So they pay an additional 50 cents above the current forward value of the spread. At the contrary, in the market 2, so between A and C, we saw in the previous slide that there was a high interest to buy an FTR because the spread is very volatile. So C doesn't move. If you can go back to the previous slides. Thank you. No, the next one then. Yes, no, the one where I was showing this one. Thank you. So here you see that the current value of the spread is €1, so 51 minus 50. But as I said, there is a high interest to buy it because the spread is unstable. We have difficulty to predict it. So you can assume that market parties will bid higher than 1. And we take the example, they bid around €3, which is actually €2 above the current forward value. So the interest market participants have in buying a spread can actually be measured, of course, taking the bids they do at the moment of the auction, but from which you subtract the current forward value of the spread. So the real market interest is translated into the additional premium, the risk premium that they put above the forward value of the spreads. Because that is what translates their probability or their assumption that the spread will vary. So if they bid roughly around the current value of the spreads, it means that market parties have see a low probability that the spread will vary. And so they don't see a high interest in buying this product. And the contrary, if they put a high value above the current forward value, it means that they see a high probability that the spread will fluctuate with time passing. So if you go to next slide. That was, yes. So this is a summary of what I just said. So independently from the forward value of the spread, so the underlying product in the FTR option, the intrinsic value, so that's the current forward value. What is important is the interest is translated in the additional premium, so the extrinsic value, also called time value, above the market price. So in the example, we see that although the total bid for the first spread was much higher than the total bid from the second spread, we saw that the risk premium for the second product was much bigger than the risk premium from the first one, which was only half a euro compared to €2. So this risk premium will, of course, increase, will be bigger if the volatility of the spread is bigger and if the correlation between the two bidding zones is bad, is lower. So that's really how you can measure the market interest, the market appetite for an FTR. And by the way, if the spread is stable, although the TSO will collect the €10 in my example at the moment of the auction, he will have to pay it back in the head. So this revenue, the €10, is not really a revenue because it will have to be paid back anyway at the end in the head. While the additional premium is a real revenue for the TSO because this is what he collects on top of the spreads that he will have to pay back later on in the day ahead. So if you go to the next slide. Yes. Now, how do we put those principles into a possible flow-based allocation? So I think this should be, of course, very clear for TSOs, but maybe for some colleagues from the market side, I just wanted to make a short recap. In a flow-based allocation, we represent here a simplified domain with 3 countries, again, with 2 borders, AB and AC. And we have the red shape, which is the flow-based domain. And the difference with an NTC extraction is that all the borders will have to be allocated at the same moment, as was explained by Ensoi before. While in an NTC extraction, you would extract the green shape and you could do the allocation border per border, and you could go up to the quantity determined by the green rectangle. You could go to the max of both borders independently. In a flow-based allocation, so the red shape again, one clearing point will have to be determined to determine where you put the most quantities and where you allocate the quantities. So for instance, if you maximize the AB and you go until the extreme right-hand side of the shape, you cannot allocate anything in AC because you are at 0. And at the opposite, if you allocate the maximum at AC, you cannot allocate anything at AB. So you need something, you need a mathematical function, you need something quantified to decide where to put the black point and where to make the sharing between the 2 borders. So this is the element you are trying to optimize, and this is a very important element of the market design for the flow-based allocation that has to be chosen. So how do you make this arbitrage? What is the elements you optimize, or what is your optimization function? And now we will make 2 assumptions for this optimization function. So if you go to next slide. We will make the assumption that the bids of the market participants, so the surplus, the income at the moment of the auction, is maximized. So that is the element that is chosen to make the choice or the arbitrage between the two borders. And again, we take the same example with A, B, and C, and the price. So you remember the 10 euro spread and the 1 euro spread, and the market participant bidding at 10.5, so a little bit higher, excuse me, for AB, and 2 euros higher than the spread for AC. So the total bid is 10.5 and 3. And this bit will be used to make the arbitrage. So obviously, you see that 10.5 is way higher than 3. So what will be the outcome is that the black point will be located trying to favor as much as possible AB. So the black point will be located on the right side of the domain. And it means that a very low quantity will be allocated to AC. Although you saw that previously I was telling you that there was a high interest in AC because the spread is very volatile. And so it means that market participants then will be facing a situation where they get nearly nothing or very low volume allocated in AC, and so they have no longer any hedging possibility. They are obliged to stay open, to stay exposed to the variation of the spreads between A and C. So if you can go to the next slide. So we think that using the total bits makes the allocation inefficient and leads to volumes allocated at the border with low spreads and possibly a high volatility, very low, so very low volume allocated on this border. And this is a big concern we had, and I understand from ACER that you made some simulation or some examples to show to see the impact of the allocation, and that is why we were very interested in seeing how the allocated quantities displayed on the slide here are spread over the different borders, because the total volume is lower, but what we fear is that it's because only the border with a high spread will get high volumes allocated. And by the way, all this independently from the size of the domain. Now we talk here, of course, all other things being equal. So we wanted to come with a proposal, a solution to propose something that would better fit the need of the market according to us. So how do we think that we should allocate while ensuring the availability of the hedging tools for the market and by maximizing still the overall welfare? If you can go to next slide. Now let's take the example that the risk premium is used to make the arbitrage. So again, taking the same example, instead of comparing 10.5 and 3, we would compare 0.5 and 2. So for the second border, for AC, the risk premium, the additional money on top of the spread is used, and you see it's 4 times bigger than for the first border. And so in that case, if you would use that value to make the arbitrage, to make the optimization, you would end up in a situation where the border AC would be favored. And so more volumes would be allocated on AC. And for us, that's precisely the goal of an FTR, because that's where the market participants need to have hedging possibilities, where you have a bad correlation between countries. If you go to next slide. So that was it for the optimization function. And maybe just a small consideration is that also on the more operational aspects, it was mentioned also by Ensoi that one big auction would have to be organized for all borders at the same time. This will have a lot of operational impact, so we hope that this is considered very seriously and that there will be sufficient stakeholder involvement. But we also wanted to maybe ask a question, probably it's foreseen already, but raise the attention on what if it fails and what will be the backup process and how the auction will be run. You know, we have had some issues in the past with the auctions on JAO, and we want to make sure that full accountability and follow-up will be ensured for that. That was a small parenthesis on the operational aspects. And so going to the very concrete suggestions or recommendations in the next slide. So we have two main recommendations. The first one is on the concept, on the design of the allocation function. We would like to suggest that the optimization function performing the arbitrage for the allocation should consider not only the total surplus, the total income at the moment of the auction, but also put some weight, it can be up to 100%, to the risk premium to make sure that borders where a low spread is present at the moment of the auction are not completely neglected by the optimization function. So in practice, we then urge the TSOs and NSOA who are now working on the technical design to consider this possibility to have at least the two parameters included as a possibility in the optimization function. It gives the opportunity during the 2 years before implementation to determine the weight. It can be up to 100%. For me, it should be 100%, but there could be a compromise or a solution found to agree on. But what we are very much afraid now is that we understand that you are drafting now the requirements drafting. And when we see the timing of consultation, it comes after. So the design phase or the timing is a bit unfortunate, and we appreciate very much NSOA that NSOA was saying that stakeholders should be involved, but in practice, we need to be involved in the design phase. On slide 43 presented by NSOA, we saw that the feedback of stakeholder was welcome, but more on the operational aspect of the platform. And we think that the feedback of market parties should also be there for the market design phase, and in particular for the choice on the objective function or on the optimization function. So probably this is also included in the high-level market design document, for which I guess there is no consultation foreseen, and so for which we would really like to have a word to say and to be listened on this. So we hope that this can be included, because it's just giving us possibility, and we would really regret that when discussing later on the EOR, we end up in a situation where the design phase is closed and where it is too late to include such a possibility. So that's really a super important point for us on the design phase. And then on the operational aspects, I just raised the concern we have on the backup and security robustness of the auction. But on that, I understand that we will be consulted in Q2, Q3 via JAO on the more operational aspects. So I have very much very good hopes that we can discuss that in this process. That's it on my side.
Thank you, Helen. Just on these 3 points, a short feedback from ACER, and then I'll give the floor to Harald from NCE. On the first point, we fully agree. We are open to these discussions. We welcome them. Are there alternative ways to allocate capacities? How to organize this? I think we may need to have at least 1 or 2 more workshops just on this topic to go into the details. There are many questions, so the proposals raise also many questions, and we need to investigate all the impacts any alternative would have. So maybe we discuss with you at MESC and with NCE how to organize the next process to discuss the details of this alternative proposal. That's maybe first reaction. The second reaction, indeed, how you will be involved. We saw the same problem, you know, because formally you are involved in the HAR, but HAR comes after the design of the single allocation platform. So what we hear from NCE is that they promised us that you will also be consulted on the SAP requirements. So when SAP is being changed, even though there is no formal need to consult, we would insist that there is formal consultation also on the SAP requirements, because indeed the requirements on the JAO tooling will be made in terms of allocation process, and there will be the key discussion how the allocation is designed. And on the last part, on the accountability and governance of JAO, we also see the same concerns and frustration that these unfortunate events happen, and there is little consequence because of this. But at the moment, JAO is organized such that regulators have very little impact to intervene. And I think that what we are thinking in the next FCA reform to strengthen the governance of JAO more in a form of RCC, where we could have direct accountability of JAO. But that's something for the FCA reform. But in the meantime, it's only our informal power and pressure and questions that we can impact the accountability of JAO, but much more it's hard to do. That's just the first reaction, but now I give the floor to Harald and
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin. I support what you have said, but maybe we can have a look again to the slide with including the timeline, because probably I did not explain this good enough. If we have here a look to the requirements definition, then it is very clearly also can be seen in this slide that from TSO side we plan to do this requirement development and drafting phase from now on together with including market participants. It's very clear and for us that it does not make sense to design a lot, put a lot of effort to the drafting phase and then to be faced with strong critics from the market participants. We want to find a good solution together with market participants for the implementation of long-term flow-based domain. And therefore, of course, we have to implement market participants from the beginning. So the high-level market design, which is drafted now, is only the basic that we have a starting point for further discussion. There is nothing fixed. It is not a final document. It is a draft for the basic discussion. You need a starting point for any discussion. And now this is especially the first workshop where we heard your concerns and these are very welcomed. And of course we will think about, for me the main message was that not only the price differences shall be relevant, also the hedging or the volatility shall be considered in the allocation process. So we have to discuss this together. It's a fair point you raised, from my understanding, and this is what we will discuss in the future, how we can do this, if we shall implement this or not. And this has to be discussed and considered, of course, for the drafting process of the allocation algorithm in detail.
Okay, thank you. Very clear.
Thank you. I see Ricard would also like to say something on behalf of Europex. If Ricard could be unmuted and Ina, could you please unmute Rickard? Okay, now it should be. Okay. Now, Rickard, you can speak.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity, and I'll try to be a little bit short. First of all, I want to say these are preliminary remarks. We are well aware of the topics at Europex, but it hasn't been the highest priority in our work in recent. But preliminary thinking on this is the following. First, we very much share the assessments and some of the concerns expressed by EFET and Euroelectric. Find that their illustrations of how the markets actually work and what is the intent and usefulness of LTTR, FTRs, or any other type, and that not least the given fact that the volatility, the inherent, implicit or inherent volatility is a key factor in being able to hedge. So it's not just the price. If the price is 10 euro higher than perhaps 2, it's not really that which is the determining factor of whether the hedge is needed. It is whether the 2, as was shown, is moving, can very much move up and down based on changing fundamentals, whereas the 10 may stay fairly stable. Well, then actually the value of the 10 is less than the 2. Intuitive. I mean, it's not intuitive, but that's I think it is a risk management perspective. That's the reality. And so, at least we would urge that these amendment proposals are seriously looked upon. Also, I find that the studies, I mean, it's a difficult topic, so I very much understand that there's still preliminary work, but the studies and analysis would be much helpful if it could be shared with market stakeholders, not least what was said about the distributions effects. It's not enough to just see the total number of megawatt across Europe, but it's actually where the megawatts would be allocated or allowed to get, because it's that is the hedging FCA guideline is about hedging opportunities and not least on a individual cross-border element and indirectly on the bidding zone level then. So we would urge that. Final, of course, it's of course further work could possibly be done or should possibly be done on impact assessment and cost-benefit analysis of moving to this kind of modeling versus perhaps improving the models that are applied today. Perhaps that's going a bit far. Maybe there isn't legal room for that. I can't judge that, but at least some further work. And so I encourage ACER and the regulators and so on, TSOs, to involve market stakeholders on that. We as Europex, of course, are interested in it since our members are organizers of both short-term markets and of long-term hedging products, be it more primarily derivatives, but these are complementary, also applicable. So whether that was short or not, I don't know, but that's a high-level preliminary remark from our side. And with that, I also appreciate that this workshop is held and that there is open discussion. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rickard. Any other interventions from anyone? So if this is not the case, I summarize the responses, sorry, both from EFET, Euroelectric and Europex, is that we need to be mindful of the hedging purpose of these transmission rights and take them into account. I think we got the message, and the planning is that we will continue this discussion until September, when these methodologies will be developed by NCE. So this will be led by NCE, and then later afterwards, once ACER makes a decision, of course, this will be continued with ACER as chairing this process. We will discuss how to organize this involvement. There will for sure be an official consultation, but beside that, I think we need to, before consultation, we need to sit together and dig deeply into these proposals. There are some questions raised, some questions being popped up regarding this proposal. For example, how to actually measure the risk premium, how to separate it from the expected value. That's just maybe one question, and the other question is perhaps maybe just as a first food for thought. If you look at the analogy of energy forward, so let's take the German Felix futures or French futures. They also have expected value and they have risk premium embedded in the price. But the price is settled at both together. So it's not that one bit which estimates a risk premium higher than the other would have a priority in case you are bidding in EX. So if two participants bid at EX and one estimates the volatility of German spot price much higher than the other, this one would not have a priority in terms of matching and matching of their bid. So if you look at the zonal futures and forwards, the value of both together is the relevant factor when you match those bids. So that's just one analogy which we could came up with, but we also need to think about what is the impact this would have on the remuneration, on the price signals in their head. So there could be possible consequences, but I think that in general we are open to these alternatives, and we need to investigate them deeply. I give one final chance for comments.
Yeah, Martin, we have some at least two comments in the chat.
Yeah.
Maybe the first one is for ACER and the second one for NCE. The first one saying, Raffaele, thank you for the presentations. Are similar workshops planned for the other CCRs? And can the timeline for implementation of long-term flow-based CCM on the other CCRs be already estimated?
Yeah, for the moment, other CCRs are not expected to implement flow-based. There is no such planning for other CCRs. At the moment, what you can see is that there will be a consistency between day ahead and long term. So those who have in day ahead flow-based will also have long-term flow-based, and those which have day ahead NTC will keep long-term NTC. That's the response to this question.
And Helene's question, more to NCE and TSO's practical question, will the high-level market design document be published?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, it is foreseen that we publish this document. We received some feedback from ACER to this document, so we will consider this feedback and then we will publish it probably on CHAO website, I think, and we will do this quite soon. I say within next week, I would expect.
Thank you, Harald. Okay, if there are no further questions, I would close the meeting here. Just to summarize that this is just the beginning of this long journey to implement the long-term flow-based. most of the discussions will happen in the following months and few years, and you will be involved informally as well as formally in consultations to provide feedback, to provide ideas, to discuss with everyone what's the best approach to implement this concept. And yeah, I'm looking forward to make this change, but also we are aware that it's not an easy process. We need to calm down the possible concerns. So we need to address those concerns, and we hope we can address those concerns before we make this significant change. Having said that, there is one question. On this, there is a question from Helen. So which document will describe the objective function? I think it will be, that's my impression, but Harald may be wrong. So it has to be both the SAP requirement, because it has to implement the IT, as well as the HAR. So HAR will also describe the objective function. But of course, HAR comes later. So HAR can only describe what has it already been implemented in the SAP requirement. That's why it's important that the core discussion is in the SAP requirement.
Yeah, that's correct. So.
Okay, any final question? No, so we can continue the discussion in MESC. There will probably be NCE will organize other venues for this discussion, formal consultations. But for today, I would like to everyone for joining this workshop, for participating actively, for listening, and yeah, thanks a lot for joining, and have a nice the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
You.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.